Yo, funny women. Where my funny women at? There they at. There they at. Boof. Tired dude. As I'm sure you are as well. But the show must go on. She's the Man must go on. I know it was a while ago, but I'm sure it made a lasting impression on you. And you haven't stopped thinking about She's the Man for the past week and a half, 2 weeks, or whatever it is. I was just reading something about it, like a thing online about because this movie to me just reeks of the like it's just you can taste the 2006 on it like hard. It just reeks of the whole girl power feminism of the late 90s and the early 2000s, um, sort of typified by the Spice Girls and like their whole ethos. Um, I was just reading something about the Spice Girls. It was like they offered a playful sex appeal and a feminist alternative to the boy band boom of the 90s, 2000s. Like, yes, that is exactly what they did. Um, and I feel like there's such a rash of movies, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, that kind of really latched onto this idea of like girl power feminism, which is it's basically like feminism for dummies. And for teenagers, it's your first introduction to you know, girls can do boy things like that kind of stuff, but at the same time, like still be sexy and like have fun with your girlfriends um, but that girl power became this mantra of that era. I feel like She's the Man was is emblematic of that for sure. Um, it is, I guess, one of the questions that we have to start off with is that a bad thing? And I don't think it is. I think it's certainly an oversimplification of feminist sort of principles and ideas, but these people know who their audience is, right? The audience for this movie then was young girls, like tween to teenage girls. So yeah, you can't, and I think you have to dilute, maybe not dilute, but because the message certainly isn't diluted. Um, you have to sort of dumb it down a little bit, right? This is for many of these girls watching this movie or these movies. It's their first introduction to, again, it's not necessarily a feminist like signpost, but into this world of thinking about their gender and thinking about gender roles and understanding that it's okay to break those and that they're mostly, if not all, stupid and arbitrary and mostly, if not all, created by a patriarchy that is interested in keeping women sort of at bay, as it were. Um, so yeah, it's an oversimplification of a complex idea, which is, I mean, number one, that's comedy, that's humor, for sure. Um, I think about all the stuff we've watched this semester, and most good comedy kind of comes from that place of like get get to the get to the bones of the idea and explore it from there. And I think that's it's a foundation to build on if we're talking about this movie for young girls and young women to start to, understand their rights and their uh, kind of the the regime that they have existed under for so long maybe doesn't have to be the way it is. Um, so, and the movie, it's not good. It's not a good movie. It's a fucking cheesy. It's a cheesy early or mid 2000s, you know, rom com basically. And but again, for me, that's the best place to look for stuff like this because no one does, and it's there. I mean, this is an adaptation of Twelfth Night, so it has this connection to the classics and like Shakespeare and all this kind of stuff. But um, the screenwriter who who wrote this is actually her second adaptation of um, a Shakespeare play. She also wrote the screenplay for 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a Taming of the Shrew um, adaptation, and an infinitely better movie than She's the Man. But I chose She's the Man because it's the inferior movie of the two, to show you that, like, if you can get, like, I'm going to talk about this movie for a half hour easily. Like, if you can get all of this from this shitty movie, imagine what you can get from, you know, like good movies and good TV shows and good things about. So, like, again, it's learning the most from the things we take for granted. So, like, She's the Man is taken for granted, I would argue. Um, so I think that's interesting, though, that the same woman wrote the screenplay for two different modern adaptations of two different um, Shakespeare plays, and both were about um, gender roles and things like that. Which begs the question: like, was this what Shakespeare was trying to do? I mean, obviously, we're looking at it with a contemporary lens in these cases, but I think about that all the time. I'm like, I wonder if Shakespeare was trying to like shake things up. Oh, Shakespeare, shake things up, boom. Um, with gender roles, they always say like they used to use young girls to play boys in stage productions of Shakespeare's. Wait, is that right? Or did boys play girls? It was one of those moves. It was a go-to move. Um, so maybe he was. Maybe it's been right there all along. All, all this uh, talk about gender equality and breaking down gender roles and stereotypes has been there since the fucking 1500s. Um, but I think about that. I shouldn't say I think about that all the time. That's weird. I think I have thought about that more than once. Um, it this I like all this stuff that we've watched has been so of its time. We talk about like the comedy of different eras. I think gives us a snapshot at the culture. Like these, it's almost like a museum, and you can take. So this is 2006 America. Like this is kind of right in the pocket, and I think that's a benefit of a lot of this, a lot of comedy. It might not. It it might not like hold up, right? It, um, might not age properly or the way we want it to or well at all, but you're like, oh, this is, it's mostly pretty accurate in terms of like dictating, like telling us what it was like, to be in 19 or in 2006 or 1995 or, yeah, I think that's a function of comedy that a lot of people overlook. I mentioned the whole, this is, and I think this is important, like the girl power era of feminism, right? Um, Spice Girls. Uh, what does the girl power era mean? I think again it was this sort of like this like cool cool marketing of feminism without it being too threatening to basically the established patriarchy and the established way. And it was very much through the male gaze, the way they sexualized even the Spice Girls and the stuff that we talked about with. I think we talked. I brought it up in here a couple times, like Sex in the City. It was like it was basically exploiting this new wave of feminism to be like, how can we turn this to our favor and making girl power just about basically serving masculinity. If that makes any sense, I think it does. Um, I said many girls' first exposure to these kind of feminist ideas, they're not hardcore. It's not hardcore feminism, but it's you know it's a baby step. It's a gateway movie, I guess, and I think it marks some progress in the feminist discussion. If this was 2006 feminism, pop feminism, or whatever, haven't we come quite a ways? I think I'll talk about that a um, more. Um, you can taste the 2006. Sorry, my notes are all over the place over here. Movie obviously is targeting gender roles, duh, uh, and to the point where it's almost beating us over the head with it. Like we get it, you know, but this goes back to one of my major tenets, which is exaggeration to the point of realization, right? So, what's the thing that is being beaten over the head? Gender roles and our, you know, uh, break the manipulation of them or breaking them, um, or transgressing them, as it were. That's what this movie is about, and it doesn't let you forget it ever. I think again that's a good thing. Exaggeration to the point of realization. In the course of this movie, you're supposed to realize how ridiculously rigid our definitions are of men and women, boys and girls, etc., etc. How rigid they are, how almost unrealistic they are to live up to. I'm not even going to say almost, how unrealistic they are to have to abide by or live up to, um, and all of those kinds of things. And for a 12 or 13-year-old girl, let's just say, watching this movie, or boy, oh, why not? Um, they, no one needs to be hit over the head more than tweeners, teenagers. So, fucking hit them, dude. Um, I mean, it's hyper stereotyped, right? The characters are hyper stereotyped. Viola's mother, Viola herself, and Duke, right? And pretty much all the other characters are hyper stereotyped. Again, I think to be like, oh, it's almost like abrasive. Like when, and it calls attention to this idea. So I'll get to that in a minute. Um, I mentioned this before, but maybe girl power, the whole girl power phase or era, was the best entry point for this demographic to kind of get their feet wet in the feminist discussion. Um, and you could argue like those girls who grew up with these kinds of movies grew up to be, you know, players, if not, you know, um, beneficiaries of the movements that it inspired, that brought us shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine and things that we've been watching, um, and other, other movies of the like. Um, yeah, the how the feminist discussion has progressed. Like that's what it helps us because this is a definite marker. 2006. Well, we just watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and they're doing everything but beating you over the head with gender, you know, gender transgressions and whatnot because she's all that did it for us. I guess that's kind of my argument, right? Think about Brooklyn Nine-Nine's approach to sort of, I guess, equality or whatever. They don't need to be patted on the back for it. They're not cramming it down your throat. They're not beating you over the head. They're not doing anything physical with it towards you. This is just the way we live now. We respect women for their merits, for their intellect, for their work ethic, for blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have anything to do with their sexuality or their bodies or anything like that. So I think you can kind of thank, right, the whole she's the man has this feeling of just like look over here, look over here, women can be different, and they're like that. You feel like at some point Viola is gonna just scream that line of dialogue. Look at this movie. Look at it. Women can be different. It's not weird. It's not sort of evil. It's not subversive. It's just true. It's just humanity. And there's none of that in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Right? So I think just that alone marks a progression. Um, hopefully, I mean, I certainly think it does. Um, there's this kind of idea like, had we turned it, has it come completely like a 180 or is it full circle? I don't know. The character that breaks the stereotypes is now the stereotype, right? Like we fully expect, I think, looking back at this movie, like we expect Duke to not be like an alpha macho fucking douchebag dude. I think at the time it wasn't like now we expect like that's almost a stereotype is that people aren't what more than meets the eye like fucking Transformers. So like yeah, Duke was sensitive once, so ooh, he's different, right? He's not what I thought he was. Like that's such a stereotype now. Um, now I just think that's kind of funny, and I guess that shows a progression too. Um, but obviously, Viola is the focal point of this movie, and um, she's had she's dead set on proving this point about gender, right? And she goes about it by negotiating the extremes of gender. Basically, if you take her mother as extreme femininity, right? The whole debutante thing and manners and dresses and heels and just all the girly stuff that Viola really doesn't have any interest in. Like that's extreme femininity, and then Duke, Duke, and not even Duke, but her male self. Is it Simon? Is that who she plays her brother? Is that right? I can't remember. Anyway, she literally becomes a man, right? So she is negotiating like this extreme femininity and this extreme masculinity at at once. That's what she's being pulled back and forth between. When we know, we talked about it a little bit in class, that if anything, you make the most progress, you're the most fulfilled and complete when you're somewhere in the middle, embracing those masculine things that you identify with and those feminine things that you identify with. Because as we know, nobody's one thing. There's no one way to be a man or a woman, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, she's this sort of little experiment. Yeah, her mother, and becoming a literal man, right? Um, and Viola, doesn't realize this at the beginning of the movie, that she's actually in the best position. She's in the middle somewhere, right? She obviously is a woman, but she has these, she has some things that have been deemed masculine by someone other than her, right? And she kind of wants to take some agency of that. Um, this is back to my whole thing about power shifting, right? Power needs to be negotiated towards the middle. This perfect example, the fact that she goes from one extreme to the other, the same power dynamics exist, right? Uh, the same structures of oppression and discrimination and things like that exist. It's just a different group you know, getting shit on, basically. So she's performing masculinity. This is what's so funny. That's what makes the movie funny. Is she's performing masculinity based on what? Right? Based on her understanding of men, which she learned largely from watching TV, watching movies, listening to her mother and her friends, like basically shitty sources for that, right? Sources that are generally invested in perpetuating the stereotypes. So it makes sense, like that's part of the joke, that, her assumption of the male gender is way off, right? And she learns that pretty quickly. It's so much so that when she shows up, you know, in most scenes where she is the guy, the guys are like, "What? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?" Like, it even smells funny to guys who she's supposed to be sort of blending in with. Um, and I can't remember if I told you guys my NASCAR story, um, but I will, because it's a great point to make. I basically went to, from my buddy's bachelor party, we went to a NASCAR race and we thought it was going to be all ironic and hilarious. So we rented the RV, like we did the whole spiel. But we had agreed like months before, like, oh, let's get all rednecked up for it. Like, let's grow mustaches and, grow mullets and like, yeah, we'll wear Oakley sunglasses and, So being me, I'm like, okay, if we're doing this, I'm doing this. So I went full method acting. I did grow a mullet. I grew my hair out and I had my wife cut in, business in the front, party in the back. I mean, head to toe, just white trash, redneck, like Oakley, like blades, sunglasses. I had a handlebar and a cut off Watkins Glen um, uh, t-shirt. I had jean shorts, not cutoffs, like jean shorts that had a hem put in them. Like these were sold to be jean shorts. Just like all black, like Reebok sneakers or whatever. And went to this race, and we had the RV parked on the infield. I got like third degree sunburn because rednecks don't wear sunscreen. That was my. I mean, I was deep in the role. So we get there, we get out, and we're walking around, and within 5 minutes, I'm like, where is everybody? Like, I looked like a complete asshole. Like, there wasn't anybody, and there's like 100,000 people there. Nobody looked like me. I looked like a fucking idiot. Never, even like legit rednecks were like, the fuck is wrong with this guy? Like, I looked like an exhibit at a white trash museum, basically. Because the point of the story is all of my understanding of what it means to be a NASCAR fan or a redneck or white trash or whatever you want to call it was based on these stereotypes of this is what their hair looks like, this is what and that had passed, but it was in my head. I'm like, oh, yeah, I nailed it. And I did, but I nailed it like 15 years earlier. So, like, that's kind of the the whole thing about her Viola becoming her brother is she's going off of shitty intel anyway of what it means to be a man. Like her understanding of it is so far off, so she completely misses the point um, because it's based on a shitty, just bad intel, like shitty information about what it means to be a man and a woman. And that can lead you, it shows that it can lead you into some precarious situations, basically. Um, yeah, it, it just blows being a gender at all out of the water. Like just that concept. Um, what are we doing? Oh, we continue to put people into smaller and smaller boxes, just so we can feel good about ourselves, pretty much, right? And I guess she wins in the end because she ends up getting to be herself. I suppose that's the goal of this whole thing. Life in general is to work towards, you know, being the truest self that you can be. Um, Sorry, my notes are getting dicey here. I think the movie also points to some other things, obviously, like the lengths that women had to go to be heard, right, and acknowledged in a world that really wasn't made for them. Like that's starting to come out in this movie, obviously. Like to be heard, Viola has to like these are the lengths she feels she has to go to, whether she had to or not. I'm sure there were better ways to go about it, but to her, she felt this. This was the only way to make change was to go, to these great lengths. And I think from a macro and a micro level, that's what this movie is about too. Um, because her mother represents that too, the links that women have to go through to be beautiful and be accepted and have, be uh, be confident and all that end of it to be a woman and the things they have to go through to be heard. Like she goes to this extreme of I'm gonna become a boy and I'll show them. Like that's the only way that she felt she could be heard. Yeah, this whole like this is what I have to do is, completely change who I am to be heard. Like that's not right. um, Now I wrote some stuff about, because again, this is a continuation of some ideas of the whole semester. Like the media wants you to stay in the girl power phase. The girl power phase is is a nice place to for for you to settle, right? Because it's completely commercialized, it's completely infantilized, and it's non-threatening in any way. It's playful sex appeal, as the sex the sex girls. I was just calling them the sex girls. The Spice Girls were defined. Um, but it does bring up these ideas of how gender is performative, right? Viola is literally performing gender um, as her brother, and um, gender is a choice we make daily. Like you could get up one day and feel like, you know what, I'm gonna put on a wig and a dress if you're a guy and just go out. Like that's a gender choice. You could do that. Um, Sexuality is not necessarily that easy, um, but a lot we like to conflate those two things as a culture, which to our detriment in most cases. Um, we're made to feel bad for transgressing, right? When we do those things, if I did wake up one day and put on a wig and a dress and went, came to work or whatever, I would be made to feel, I wouldn't feel bad, but I would be made to feel bad for this gender transgression. Like, how dare I? And that's probably a shitty example, but when we always are like, are we bad for doing this? Is this taboo? When we feel ourselves, or we know that we're, maybe stepping into a world that's not ours, right? Um, so, in this case, it's the sports, right? A girl liking sports, oh my goodness, like that has changed quite a bit since then. But at the time, it was like, oh yeah, dyke or whatever you be called or something like that. It's just, yeah, just negative bullshit. But we're made to feel bad for being who we are, basically. Like a girl liking sports, you shouldn't have to feel bad about that. The culture shouldn't be making you question this interest or this passion, um, but it generally does, and that's something that I think this movie tries to sort of unearth, is why that. Um, we underestimate the characters in the movie only to be proven wrong. To ideally ask, why do we still do this? Why do we still? Why are we still estimating people, let alone underestimating them? Right? It's like Duke turns out to be something a little different than we thought, and Viola and all these kinds of things. Like it's basically like, okay, it's pointless to do that, so let's stop doing it. Let's stop making assumptions based on gender lines. Let's stop it. Um, and I wrote this down, like the whole how it started, how it's going meme. Like that's an interesting, like, if in this case she's the man is how it started. This whole like girl power, not that's not how girl power started, but this whole feminist discussion in 2006, how it started. How's it going? Well, Brooklyn Nine-Nine's how it's going. I That would be my contribution to the meme-averse. Um, Embracing yourself, no matter what that is or what that looks like. I think that's what this movie is about. She had to go a long way to get to that point. Viola did, but eventually, I think that's one of the takeaways, a big takeaway of the movie. Um, and adding to that, embrace the things the culture wants you to suppress. If they're there, like your passions are not should not be gendered. In other words, shouldn't feel bad about liking something or being passionate about it or wanting to learn about it or having an interest in it, no matter what it is. So that's She's All That. So that. Um, I'll talk to you guys.